Hello, welcome to this evening's book talk. I'm Joel Willems, and I'm also joined with Hannah Hazelberg. We're with the Bayview Historical Society, and tonight's book we're talking about is by Martin Hintz, Milwaukee Brews and Booze. So, Hannah, could you tell us a little bit about the author?
Absolutely. So, Lauren Martin or Marty Hintz, he was an very prolific writer in our area. He wrote over 125 books during his life. He also worked for the Milwaukee Journal, so he was a newsman. And he loved collecting not only local stories, but he also wrote many things that went into national publications as well. Unfortunately, Marty can't be with us because he passed away at the age of 75 in September of 2020. But we are very excited to be discussing his book nonetheless and talking about some of the fascinating people that he met on his journey to put together this work, and then also sharing some of his passion, which was for the Irish American community, and his work with those entities. So we'll dive into this and kind of explore some of that legacy as well. But
Um,
also, too, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, this book is connected with our next event we're going to have in person, which will be Thursday, September 22nd at Sugar Maple. We're doing a beer tasting at Sugar Maple here in Bayview. And again, that's Thursday, September 22nd. You can find information on that on our website, on our Facebook, and pay attention to tonight's topics and lecture, essentially, because we're going to have some trivia that night, and it will be helpful for you to know a thing or two. All right, so I'll turn it over to you, Joel.
I know some of our trivia is also used in some of the uh, the tours and things like that that they do in Milwaukee at some of the locations. So we'll spill the beans on a few things, and maybe you can win
Yeah,
some free beers. But
excellent.
yeah, Hannah, like you said, I mean, he did interview a lot of people in Milwaukee. Obviously, Milwaukee brewery history is very much a passion for many people in Milwaukee, including many of the bars and breweries that we have now. The book was written about a decade ago, so it's still pretty accurate, up to date. You can find it easily on Amazon or an eBay or something like that, and I know it's still also in many local Milwaukee bookstores. So my first little slide here is Martin kind of sets the tone for us, talking about the Germans that came to Milwaukee, and really that's what set the brewery here. This is one of my favorite maps in all of existence. So it's on the Library of Congress. It's an 1852 map showing the travelers from Germany, how they would get to the different places in America and what the costs would be. If you could zoom in on this, I don't think I zoomed in on it at all on my next slide, but Milwaukee was one of the furthest locations and one of the most expensive on this. But we started, especially in the 40s, 50s, and on, getting many German immigrants to America. So this was Wisconsin at about that same time, slightly different than today. Notice some of the counties, especially up north, are really large. So we had just kind of formed as a state. Next year is our 175th anniversary in 1848. So they hadn't really divided up all the population yet. But where you can see down in the bottom corner, Milwaukee, it kind of was pretty much where our Milwaukee County and everything is still today. This is towards the introduction there of the book. So I just found these kind of facts here really interesting. That there, we were 1 year into being a state, and we had so many breweries, and they were just growing at an exponential leap. I have actually talked to a few uh, brewers in the area about some of this history, and I try to make my own homemade beer from time to time. And most of this beer at the time was not what we would consider the Milwaukee Pilsner ale or our lager beer that we enjoy today, because that's a cold fermenting yeast. They could not bring that with them over on the ships at that time. So this was all ales that they were doing at the time, which is a top fermenting, faster beer. Lager is actually just a German word meaning to wait. So you normally have to wait 3 to 6 months for the yeast at the cold temperatures to do their work. Whereas in ale, sometimes you could be drinking that within just a couple of weeks of starting it. So that also is very good for the people at this time. Hey, we're trying to make the beer real fast and get it out to the thirsty individuals. So roll out the barrel there in his last sentence. Of course, we still sing that at the baseball park all the time.
Joel, I love that you brought up that little bit of history of brewing, because that was absent from this book in terms of how beer is actually produced. And I would have loved to seen more of that covered in this book. I was actually just recently out at Old World, Wisconsin, where they've added the history of brewing. And it's great. It's just a really fun exhibit. And it's so great when they're talking about the malts and how the malts are roasted and the roastiness affects the color. And then when they add the hops in the boiling process and then adding hops at the end. And it was just such a wonderful thing to learn about. I wish that would have been more present in the book.
Yeah, I mean, the book is trying to be pretty complete, but not getting into too much detail. I would say it's a wonderful book for like a beginner really wanting to learn, and then it opens up some of that stuff where you can be like, oh, I'm kind of curious about more of this person or this story or that, and then you could deep dive into it. And he has a lot of the resources at the end. He even quotes some of the other wonderful historians that we have in Milwaukee. So those people kind of do different things. I mean, a Milwaukee brewery history book with all the details would be, thousands of pages. So,
this is so
true. That's a very interesting thing that I've always had. And again, we're kind of talking about our pioneers at the time.
Absolutely.
This is then his first chapter, starting right into it with a lot of the beer barons, some of which we still have kind of that presence throughout Milwaukee. Then I love Captain Frederick's Pabst little comment there. Yeah,
especially given that it says that he was more of a wine connoisseur.
Captain Frederick Pabst, and you're going to get that information at both the Best Place tours and at the Pabst Mansion, was kind of a different individual than the legend that kind of grew up with it. First of all, he wasn't really a captain. He steered a boat, but he didn't really have like a captain rank.
No, he was a ship hand.
Yeah, it was just more like an honorary type of thing. And once you get a lot of money, obviously I was a captain. It'd be like leading the American Revolutionary War and having like 20 Minutemen and being like, I was a general.
Well, the blue ribbon was a marketing ploy.
We'll get to that in a little bit too. So that was very good. I mean, you got to put that type of thing in there. Yeah. And then the Pabst changing the name, to himself. So that's very interesting. But there right away, he talks about some of the, that those dynasties and those names that you still see on so many of the buildings. And once you just start, to read any history book of Milwaukee, you see the Pabst, the Brumders, where the publishing, the Fiskers, the Folks, the Vogels, the Mitchells, the Isleys, all those wonderful names that still affect us. And many of them are still living amongst the midst there in Milwaukee.
Absolutely. It was interesting too when he'd talk a little bit about the local politics, Mayor Seidel, and how the Seidel becomes, the nickname for a Stein, and that his secretary was Carl Sandburg. That blew my mind.
Yeah, so Carl lived in, I think, a couple locations in Milwaukee, and I think at one time there was a movement to get one of his houses turned into, a wonderful, like a monument or something like that. But we probably know him more as a poet, but back then he did more like the archival work and for his personal library and helping him write, some of the things that he needed to do. So the first one he gets right into is Schlitz, which I think we all know that famous tagline there at the bottom, the beer that made Milwaukee famous. So I think it's wonderful that he starts with that right away. Um,
Absolutely. I mean, essentially that Chicago fire,
yeah.
you know, that made that the beer that made Milwaukee famous.
As I always tease people about the little fire that was in Chicago. They call it the Great Chicago Fire, but as us Wisconsinites know, that same exact evening was the worst city fire in history in Potosi, or
Peshtigo?
Potosi, yeah, Peshtigo,
Peshtigo.
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So that anniversary is coming up. It's always in October. I believe it's the 8th. Yeah, they about 2,000 people in Peshtigo passed away from that. Yeah, that's a very interesting book and a very neat part of history too. It's confounded people for a while, but you have that wonderful Schlitz on there. They were probably the largest in Milwaukee for the longest amount of time with all the things they were doing. That tagline I always find hilarious. Here is from about 1910. I found this in a newspaper when I was researching. I'm the director here at the Hazelberg History Museum, but I also used to be the curator at the Chudell Museum in Milwaukee. And we had a lot of beer stuff, so I've kind of included some of that in there. But here's the famous Narragansett from New England. And there at their bottom tagline is the beer that made Milwaukee jealous. And there was at least half a dozen of that same tagline in Wisconsin. I mean, I've heard of those from Stevens Point and, from the Eau Claire area and even from other Milwaukee ones and stuff. So a Milwaukee beer was, quite a title, quite a thing that other cities were like, we're comparing ourselves to and setting us up with.
Well, and he says that Schlitz was only second to Anheuser-Busch at the time, and at their height.
Yep. So here we have the kind of the guy who made Schlitz really get started. You notice his last name is not Schlitz. No. So we kind of inherited there along the lines with some of the relatives. It's interesting. Many of the large breweries in Milwaukee did actually at one time descend down to the daughters who then married people. And that's kind of how they went off to the area. But the Eline family also well known in the area, many people. So we had a Schlitz exhibit at the Chudell Museum, and many Eline family members came there. So yeah, they're still prominent in the area. Here goes back a little bit to what we were talking about, the yeast type of thing. So I kind of cut off a little bit from one page and added it to here. But here in 1883, then Danish biochemist, I think it was 1883. Let's see, what page is that? It's right towards the front here. The biochemist kind of came out with a special yeast culture specifically for beer making. And it kind of became the Milwaukee standard one with more of the clean Pilsner that we know of today. So, yeah, I see that first Schlitz was using it, and then Pabst used it just a few years later too. Oh, we're going to start using this beer. So, yeah,
and Schlitz brought about the brown bottle. That was so important to preservation of the beer as well.
It really was. I mean, Miller, the genuine draft, it's in that clear bottle all the time. Then you can see that it's a clean, clear beer, and that was the reason for that. It was also cheaper to make a white, clear glass bottle than to make a brown or a blue or a green. Some of the other ones, just like with wine bottles. But there used to be that when I was young, they had that tagline, "Don't skunk your beer." Have it in a brown one, and it protects from UV lights and all this other kind of things. So very, very neat thing. Here is some of the other yeast that we had in Milwaukee. He gets into this a little bit later, but I thought I would add it here because when I make my homemade beer, it's almost always beer yeast from Red Star.
Excellent.
Yeah, of course, with the Milwaukee stable forever, down in the Miller Valley there, in Menominee Valley, and you would smell that, especially like at the
Mhm.
baseball game, because
Yes.
they would open up the vats to flip the yeast and get the yeast out a couple times a day, and it would just make everything down that valley just smell. I thought it smelled like beer or like
Right.
bread, but it's both. It's that yeasty smell.
And it was eventually sold to Julius
Yeah.
Fleischmann yeast. So that's how I know Red Star is Fleischmann yeast.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
yeah.
Well, there's both still available in the stores.
Oh,
So you can get them both ways, at least around Milwaukee. I know probably outside of Milwaukee, you're going to see more of the Fleischmann's.
hmm.
Um, though the beer barons have also left quite a legacy of architecture in the area. A lot of what they built, unfortunately, has been demolished and things, but this is on Lake Drive property where the Eline property was. Joseph, who inherited the business later on. And of course, we have the Pabst Mansion. We'll get to that later on Grand Avenue, Wisconsin Avenue. That was kind of the first area where they built all the fancy estates. Then in Milwaukee, the second area was Highland Boulevard, and that became the Nouveau Riche, or some of the other people coming later on. And then afterwards, they wanted to be directly over the harbor on that Lake Drive, which is still got many fine estates and things like that, such as this one is still there. So I'm not familiar myself with this architecture firm. They're not, some of the other ones that we have in Milwaukee with the names and things like that, like Eschweiler. But it looked like they, did wonderful structures and kind of did the very high-end clientele all the time. So here we see that under that Joseph E. line, then Schlitz survived even Prohibition, the Great Depression. All these things were pretty difficult for the areas when you rely on alcohol. I like that Salinas' interest in the American Tobacco Company. So they were, getting very diversified.
Mm-hmm.
Malt syrup that they had for many other things. I think I've got, nope. I don't have one for Schlitz of their malt extract and things like that they did. They did quite a wide range of soft drinks during Prohibition. As soon as it was over, they got rid of all that. They're like, yeah, we're going just back to beer. That's what we do. So the next one that we talk about is Pabst. And you've already mentioned the Blue Ribbon.
Yes.
So
Which,
do you know that little trivia quiz part with that one?
well, I think it should be, for sure. And then also the fact that, this was featured at the World's Fair in Chicago.
Yeah. So they often ask that at the Best Place tours, and I've heard some of the docents at the Pabst Mansion mention that too. They did not win a blue ribbon at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair because they gave out gold medals. But Mrs. Pabst, you couldn't tie a gold medal on every single bottle. So she literally, or somebody in the factory literally tied a little blue ribbon, first out of a fabric. And then later on, it was that paper thing. And then it kind of became this, little logo to show that, hey, we won an award. Several awards were given out at the 1893 World's Fair. So it wasn't like they won the award for the best beer, but it was probably a certain style and things like that. There's the gentleman, Captain Pabst. And here we go into quickly a little bit on how that changed hands. So, and then even when it changed hands, they decided we're going to change the name. And I love that way at the bottom there. You see that Martin has another interesting one in there. What was the tagline? He drinks best who drinks Pabst, because it had been the best brewery before Captain Pabst became the president, and then they changed the name with the hop leaf corporate logo, which you
Yes.
can see kind of right here. This is
Jacob Best.
yeah, this is at the museum. So you see the bee there and then the hop leaf around it. The museum has a couple of these, which are most likely tied house chairs. They have even older versions there at the Best Place that they found one when they were remodeling the place. Then they had many others made. So not an inexpensive thing to do, but they definitely are very neat logo with that.
And that, just as a plug for that tour, that is a really fun tour to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, and you see all the changes through the years that they've done in there. It's just a labor of love for those people that have worked on that, to save that from the wrecking ball, that otherwise might happen. And as we're talking about that, here too was saved with only a few weeks to go, the Pabst Mansion. When individuals in Wisconsin or in Milwaukee came together and said, yeah, we don't want this to be sold to be knocked down. So it's the last of this era of beer baron mansions in this area. There's a similar era one in other states. Like we mentioned, Budweiser has something about that same era. Some of the small ones. I grew up in New Ulm, Minnesota. They have a mansion that actually looks somewhat similar to this on the outside. Just a smaller version of it, but it's also the same era. So yeah, this is a really, really fun tour that they do there at the Pabst Mansion. A very popular stop for a lot of visitors to Milwaukee. I bet you a lot of Milwaukee born and raised people have not gone on the tour though. Figured we'll do it whenever. But
Right.
yeah, go there and learn a lot about your history.
You got to be a tourist in your own city. You have to go to these places. I love the Pabst Mansion. It's a lot of fun. And didn't the Archdiocese own this building?
Yes, they did for quite a long time. When I was at the Chudell Museum, it's on the same block as the Catholic Financial Life Tower. And one of the young girls that lived there was friends with someone over at the Archdiocese. So she would go there from time to time. And we got a little bit of her memories that she wrote up. And she mentioned that. And at that time, it's interesting. She's like, and now that Archdiocese place has become a museum. Well, little to know that for a while we turned her house one time into a museum as well. So, and then here is the pavilion, which is now attached to it, although they are working to restore this. So this is at the Chicago World's Fair. I believe it is the only photograph that they've ever been able to find of that inside. You can see it's inside.
Right.
Most likely it's inside the manufacturer building there at the World's Fair. They had several big buildings and pavilions made very nice. We have quite a lot of history of that World's Fair and how it's affected Wisconsin over the years. Again, 1893, it was kind of the era of electricity and advertising. And that's when America got introduced to things like sheet music and postcards. So these were all European things, and they were like, oh, that's something cool over here. Or on this side of Wisconsin, like especially around Manitowoc, aluminum molding. So we had like the meta molds and all the fake aluminum Christmas trees later on. They all came because, oh, we saw that other countries can do this. So really, really a fantastic World's Fair. I don't know if you've read the book about it.
Devil in the White City?
Yeah.
I have read it. And did you see, I'm sorry, this is such a tangent, but did you see that they're planning a mini series or with Keanu Reeves as Holmes?
It will be interesting. I know for a long, long time, Leonardo DiCaprio was linked to that. So I follow that writer on his Facebook page and have read many others. Very, very good books. The historical fiction, but the history is very accurate in there.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it really tells you about that World's Fair. They estimate 20% of the U.S. attended that World's Fair, and it helped get us out of a recession in 1892 because of how much money was being spent traveling and doing souvenirs and all of that. So really, really interesting stuff. I highly recommend the book. It has a little murder mystery in there. It gets a little gruesome at times. If you're not into that, you can just skip those parts.
Right.
But yeah, this is great. They are these were not made to last, so they were built very quickly, and it's really something that it's lasted as well as it has. Captain Pabst bought it and attached it next to his mansion, and it's been like their gift shop and tourism entrance for decades. And now they are putting it down and having a multi-million-dollar restoration on it. So unfortunately, Prohibition also affected Pabst. So they did the extracts, as you see here, which is kind of the malt that you had talked about, with the mixing and things. Here's another one where they're still saying it's very perfect for you and healthy and everything. Yeah, this looks like it's the framers of the Constitution here in the background. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you.
Right.
Then we get into the brewery that still has its major presence in Milwaukee, the Miller Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
And I like this, the two pictures that Martin did right away with Jacob Leinenkugel and with Frederick Miller. And you can read right there, about a century later, Miller purchased Leinenkugel's brewery. The Leinenkugel family, though, continued to run it, and that label then became what we would call, their micro brand today. Most people that I've ever mentioned that to, they have no idea that Miller owns that.
Right.
They're like, what?
There's a lot of people who don't realize that Pabst is contracts with Miller Coors, that they don't actually do any. They're a virtual brewer.
Right.
They're not really brewing beer here. They're Miller Coors is brewing their beer.
Yeah, somebody owns the label, the name, the recipes, all that kind of thing. And it can be difficult once in a while to try to grow when you don't have everything there for you, but at the same time, they don't have the expense of factories and workers and everything.
Exactly.
So yeah, obviously you see it's courtesy of Miller Coors, those merged together, and he does talk about that. It reaches into that. Their very famous logo for a long time, the girl in the moon. So I've heard from so many people, they're like, yeah, that was designed after my mom or my grandma or things like that. It's like, seriously? There was many artists that worked together at this. There was several slight variations on the girl. I'm not going to debate. Yeah, if you say it was, she was probably an influence. Yeah, that's probably true. So keep telling that story. My favorite part, though, is the moon design itself. It actually became a prominent marketing tool for designs after this movie producer in France, Georges Millet, made The Man in the Moon, the very first full-length movie that went all over. And the whole world just got fascinated by the moon and the imagery and all that type of thing. So in my museum at one time, I pulled together a whole bunch of our different marketing items that we had. And it was like, yeah, you can see all these various things. They all were using the moon. My favorite was Ivory Flakes at the time, and Ivory Soap also had a moon with a star background like that. So yeah, it was a very common thing at that time point. So it's, you can't say, hey, because Miller made it famous, everybody else did. Not really. I mean, everybody was just kind of, hey, we're all going to come up with the idea with this moon. So there you see too that Miller has also gone through some, past mergers and development and stuff. So it's not like they were only been owned by themselves for a long time. You see, Philip Morris bought them all out. And still today, Philip Morris still owns shares of that combined, brewery and alcohol conglomerate. So it's just a way for different ones to kind of expand their field. And hey, we have more money and you have less money. So in '69, when that happened, then Miller was probably still third largest in Milwaukee, whereas now they're the last that survive, partly because these other larger, wealthier organizations bought them out and were able to keep them going when other ones couldn't. And then we get the Blatts. Probably one that not everybody knows quite as much. This also you can find in certain areas of America. It's also brewed under contract by different places. Stroh's owned them for a long time. Stroh's out of Detroit, so that was kind of sad. But Blatts also was changing over the brown bottles like that. So they were like, oh yeah, that's an important thing. You see, they were the first Milwaukee brewer to market the beer nationally. Distribution centers in all the major places where you're going to want to be, and all those major ports too. So you can see, hey, we can get it around, faster to other areas of the nation. But Blatts, you see that he sold his brewery for quite a while, even before Prohibition. So yeah, quite a lot of annual production at that time. I mean, again, it was a big complex here in Milwaukee, the big Blatts area. There's still parts of it standing. And then chewing gum and soda are their things. Here's their gum ad. This is a back of one of our I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's in our museum. So you see there ones there, grape and mint. Those were their two that they were doing the chewing gum.
Oh my gosh. I wonder if they were any good.
Well, more research that I did into this, the grape gum actually got confiscated in New York Harbor at one time because they said it was rotten. So maybe they weren't the best at making gum. They were brewers. Eline had did a lot of chocolate, and again, many people were like, this chocolate wasn't the greatest. They didn't call it Schlitz chocolate or even Eline or Uline chocolate. They had an E in there, like an English
Eline.
Yeah, Eline. And some of those buildings are still around if you know where to look. They also did the malt extract. Besides being in cooking, these were very useful to make your own homemade beer with, which was not illegal.
No, you could make, and if you had a prescription from a nice doctor.
Yeah. You could get it that way too. So.
And of course it was, religious embedding,
Yeah. A lot of people got ordained as priests or rabbis so that they could get their religious requirements of wine and other alcohol and spirits. The amount of medicinal pharmacies in Milwaukee basically replicated the number of bars that were there before Prohibition, and they were all, hey, we're doing soda and ice cream, and of course we're doing medicinal liquors. It's just a given.
Yeah,
we're not breaking the law. So yeah, a lot you can. Again, entire books have been written about that. Just Milwaukee itself, it's a fun little thing, and Martin goes a little bit, into it to just kind of whet your appetite. But again, he's got those resources there to be like, well, read this book or check out this thing and really get into that.
Absolutely.
Here's Gettleman. Their slogan they used for a long time: get Gettleman. So many people remember the songs and things like that for Gettleman. They miraculously, we've managed in Milwaukee to save one or two of their buildings. This is in the back of a fisherman's pocketbook. This ad was in there, and there's a recipe in that pocketbook that we have in our collection to tell you how to make like a beer battered cod or fish or something like that with it. Here is their little place. It was very near to where the Miller Brewery was down in the valley. So Miller Brewery actually eventually swallowed up that whole land area.
Yeah. They eventually owned them.
Yeah. But again, that meant that they were using, they were making that beer at some time. Many of the small labels have been bought at one time by the bigger breweries in America. And in many cases, they will not make that beer again. They're like, we competed with those people 100 years ago. We
Right.
bought them, we put them out of business. We don't want them to come back. You know,
Exactly.
better run.
That's smart business on their part. It truly was.
So they still own the rights to, the labels, I'm sure they still have all those recipes and stuff, all that neat kind of thing.
Mhm.
This one is not mentioned by Martin Hintz, but it's one of my favorite ones because it's not mentioned. It's kind of the lesser known big one at the time. It didn't last too long after the Great Depression, but the Cream City Brewing Company,
Mm.
and a few of their buildings are still uh, up as well. If you kind of know where to go, it's across the interstate to the west from where the Pabst Brewery was. So there's some naturally Cream City brick buildings there, and the Cream City Brewing. This is a wonderful paper poster that we have from about 1900 in the collection. And my favorite is there too. I don't think I added the item here, but the brewmaster was during Prohibition was a gentleman from Germany, and he hated that America had Prohibition. So when he sold you the malt extract, he gave you his recipe how to turn that into beer. And there's a tagline in there that basically says, where it's not allowed, then don't add the yeast and follow this. But, by the way, here's the entire recipe on how to do it. So your house was not getting rated if you were just making 100 gallons of beer for your personal consumption a year, which is a ridiculous amount of beer.
Yes.
You would have to have like 3 or 4 bottles of beer a night to drink 100 gallons yourself. And that was allowed, though. You could brew personally 100 gallons. They're figuring it's not enough to sell and make a lot of money and,
Mm.
be an Al Capone type of thing. But at the same time, we realize, you probably don't have the best water, or you have that family tradition of, hey, we have a beer, that's just what we do. So a couple of the new ones, right? Have you been on
Yes.
these tours with
I have been on both of these tours, and I'm particularly fond of the River Westine, which noted in the book was about 25% of their production. So I'm prosit for that beer.
Yeah, so these are, the new brewery traditions that have come out. Sprecher was really one of the first there, established in Milwaukee in 1985. Before, like, a microbrewery was really a thing. It was
Mhm.
kind of like, our local version of, Boston Sam Adams. That was kind of an early thing like that, too. Um, Today, Sprecher can be found many, many places. These are both more like a regional beer. I mean, you're not going to be expected to find a lakefront, in Los Angeles,
Right.
or a Sprecher beer, down in Miami. You may find a Sprecher root beer down in Miami, though. their
Absolutely.
their sodas have really been their thing, and that's a hallmark now of so many breweries. They're like, oh, let's have a non-alcoholic soda. So it's
Mhm.
kind of something like they were doing during Prohibition with so many of these breweries. It's kind of like, hey, that's another market we can tap into.
Well,
I've
and
also made some homemade sodas, and I mean, all these things are very easy. The carbonation does all the work. The yeast does all the work when you make homemade beer. You just kind of mix it, sit back, and wait.
And I love the fact that Randy Sprecher had worked for Pabst, and then when he was laid off, that was when he decided to launch Sprecher Brewery. Like
Yeah.
it was like then it was his time, then it was his shot. And the soda has made it easier for him to finance making these really intricate, interesting beers like Black Bavarian. I love that one. I think that's one of the better ones. That take a long time to age, and then
Yeah.
it allows for craftsmanship that makes a fine brew.
Well, and you need that. You need your niche, your identity, how it's going to be. You can't just open up a brewery and, hey, I'm going to make only an IPA because that's the most popular beer maybe right now.
Right.
You got to be like, oh, what are we doing different than somebody else is? And Sprecher Brewery has actually become a place where they contract with soda making. So they make other soda labels there and stuff that you might not know that they've been doing.
Yep.
Lakefront, have you been on that tour?
I love that tour. I think I've been on that tour twice.
Yeah. It's again, they've really made that a Milwaukee kind of a thing. They have so many Milwaukee stuff in there, like the Bernie, the Brewer
Yes,
slide from the old ballpark from
I love
Milwaukee
that.
County Stadium. Yeah. Um, it's like the brewery tours. If you've ever seen like a movie anywhere where they show like a brewery tour, that's what Lakefront does. It's not
Yes,
like, I mean, it's fun to do like a Miller tour too, but they're kind of like, and over there you see they're making 100,000 gallons of this. Whereas at Lakefront, they're like, well, get up here and smell, how this smells. It's like that
yes.
kind of a thing. And by the way, you'll be tasting it too, so don't worry about that.
I totally agree with that. I want to go on all. I've gone on all of these tours, but this makes me want to go on them all again.
Hey, you might not have been on them since COVID, right? Come back
That's
out,
true.
enjoy these places again.
Yeah.
We got to support them or they're not going to last, and then we'll all be sad. Hey,
Yeah.
Lakefront's not around. There are some in the book that Martin gets to that even though it's only 10
Right.
years old, Horny Goat, they're not around anymore. You
Yep.
know, the,
Stonefly is now Company Brewing, which I actually have a family tie to Company Brewing. That's my husband's cousin.
oh, you must be
So a
from
little plug
Milwaukee.
for them. St. Francis Brewery, he mentions as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got some family still around St. Francis area. And I don't know if I visited the brewery. I've had their beer, though. Yeah, I can
Right.
do that.
Yeah.
Here we have a brew pub. So he gets into some of that, some of these other ones that were early kind of getting started. The rules in Wisconsin at the time were harder than they are now to open up like a brew pub or brew on demand or these small breweries. So Milwaukee Ale House was really one of the pioneers here, and I'm sad to say they have announced recently that they will be closing. So
Such a
get
shame.
there and support
Yeah.
them before it's gone, and say
Mhm.
that you had visited this landmark. They always had pretty good food whenever I went there as well. I mean,
Oh yeah.
and it's a wide gamut. It's not like, oh, it's only the young college people go there, or it's only the older stodgy people. I mean, I've seen so many different groups there from the small families too. So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we can't keep everything all the time, but many of these suffered. I know the Milwaukee Ale House during COVID was even um, doing their food and delivery, just whatever they could. But you do this for so long, and then it's like, okay, now we still can't hire enough people, and we're going to close down. Um, then Martin gets into a little bit more. He kind of backpedals, and he does some of the distilleries. The
Mhm.
reason I have this photograph here is it's a family photograph of mine. So
Oh.
it's also in the Milwaukee newspaper. It gets shared a lot. I always count from the right. So the third house from the right or the second house from the left is another kind of like a Pabst mansion thing. That was Adolf Zinn ran that. And I'm not related to the Zinns. They were big Brewsters or Maltsters, or I learned some more stuff in this book, kind of what they did with the Red Star yeast, even, and that kind of thing. But my mom's grandma and her cousin were the servant girls, the two servant girls in this house. And everybody always reads the description and they share it because this is on Highland Boulevard. So it's like
Mhm.
the new rich at the time. The buildings are gone. They only lasted less than 30 years
Mhm.
and kind of sad. And they had, I think, 8 chimneys and 11 fireplaces in this house. Mr. Zinn had like 8 or 9 kids.
Mhm.
Again, I've met some of those family members over the years, and I'm like, oh, yeah, we used to be your servants, that kind of thing. So when I watch Downton Abbey, I relate definitely to the servants and not to the rich people.
Oh yes.
That's what
I
I
come
think.
from a long line of peasant stock from Europe, so yeah.
But again, these gorgeous, and you see, this is with the youth of those trees. They had just built into this area. So this is about 1880, 1890 here,
Mhm.
um, and they were all knocked down. I think during the Great Depression, some of them became like boarding houses and things like that. And even most of those were eventually knocked down. I love the wooden sidewalks that you can see there. But Mr. Zinn, you see a little bit here. He was actually with the Meadow Springs, which was a distillery. And there you see how they got into the yeast with what became the Red Star
Mm-hmm.
and everything that they did. I love the Red Star yeast being delivered by the horse.
Yeah.
But yeah, Red Star yeast, definitely a big thing. And there you see the Fleischmann's yeast. So
Yes.
they kind of, made their, if you will, their competitor later on. But I only buy Red Star yeast when I buy yeast, even
I
though.
wanted to ask you, Joel, if you knew if the Nunemacher distillery that's mentioned, is that the Nunemacher the same as the Nunemacher collection, that same family?
Yes, it is.
That's public?
Yeah, the same as that Nunemacher collection. There was a Nunemacher opera house in Milwaukee that was extremely popular. Yeah. So
Awesome.
yeah, again, that kind of that same family, that relation.
Mhm.
Um, but Red Star yeast is not made in Milwaukee anymore, but their headquarters are still, I think, in Milwaukee or somewhere in Milwaukee. When you look on the packet, it still says Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So here you see then some of the new distilleries, the Great Lakes Distillery. Again, one of kind of the first newer, larger ones. I know there's other little up and coming ones all the time. They give a wonderful tour, great tastings that they do there. A lot of history that goes into what they produce and also how they market and label their bottles. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Have you
Guy
that one?
Rehorst is the creator of Great Lakes Distilling.
Oh,
And it was the first distillery since Prohibition.
wow. So there you go. Yeah, they were the first big ones. Yeah, Prohibition really shut down the distilleries, and that was the main effect of Prohibition. They didn't like the hard liquors. They didn't really mind too much the beers and stuff because it's so much lower alcohol. And back then they didn't really have, the safer water to drink that we have today. But it also closed down many things like this. This is the Pabst Whitefish Bay Resort. So wonderful, fancy. They made it more like a carnival atmosphere, everything going on there. Notice all the German kind of architecture with it. This is the main place there. I don't know if they referred to this one as the Rathskeller, but that's normally what they call the spots in the German name where you would stop in and enjoy something to eat and, of course, a drink. So this was up in Whitefish Bay, where the kind of where the Big Bay is, and they especially got all the people coming out from Chicago and Milwaukee and even across, the lake and everything like that. Very, very popular destination. Depending on what time, I mean, they were getting thousands of people a weekend in there. Another big kind of bar or experience, if you will, in Milwaukee, and this is from the public library, the Schlitz Palm Gardens. So this is on today's Wisconsin Avenue. It closed down also because of Prohibition, and then became the Palm Garden Theater, or just the Garden Theater. It's around where the
Shops at Grand Avenue?
yeah, the Shops at Grand Avenue. I was trying to think of that name because they're coming out with a new name for all of that experience again. They keep rebranding that, trying to make something happen there. But yeah, I think this was like where the Office Depot used to be. It was like that building, but the building eventually was torn down. But it was that location, across from the our Big Blue Federal Building downtown there. This one I just have in there because it's a fun one. So there was also all these clubs that were also places that you could join. And yeah, the common thing is they're drinking beer. You can kind of see those guys in the top left over there. They're holding their pints. And obviously the gentleman in the white, he's serving the beer. Martin goes in here about the mustaches. And I don't know if this was real, but he talks about, yeah, many of these places, they had contests on which of their beer sellers had the longest or the best mustache. But hamburger plug, unfortunately, they did not eat hamburgers here. They're from Hamburg, Germany. It's that kind of a thing. So, which was a major, going back to that map at the beginning, a jumping off point to come from Germany to America. So, this is courtesy of the Milwaukee County Historical Society. They have this in their collection. So, that was really more of the German thing. You know, the parks. You go outside with nature. You sit under a tree. You drink a beer. And normally they did it on a Sunday, the day of rest. You go to church for the first half of the day. And instead of like today in Wisconsin, then after church, you watch the football game, you know, and drink beer. They would just sit outside and drink beer. So
Yep.
That must be why we kind of do that, right? And it just flowed so naturally for us all. Well, yeah, we used to do that. Then we listened to it on radio, and then we watch it on TV. So, you know, it's just sitting around chatting. We do all this other stuff now. Some of the other bars that have been in Milwaukee for a long time, they don't look always like the fanciest thing. Hannah, do you know what this one is?
You showed me this picture earlier, and I should have retained it.
It's the Kaz's.
Oh, it's Kaz's Mini Bowl! Duck pin bowling! Oh, I haven't been there in a minute.
Oh, I know. It gets written up so much on things to see in Milwaukee, you know, for visitors from around the whole world. You got to stop in at Kaz's. And
it's so fun.
It is a lot of fun, but, you know, it doesn't look like a Pabst Whitefish Bay resort or anything like that. It's just, hey, this is this establishment. It's been around forever. It's a whole lot of fun. You know, get to experience some of that weird Milwaukee quirkiness that we have, and of course have some beer. Oh my gosh, he goes very well into this and how the Wolskis got their famous "I close Wolskis" thing. Again, this is just in the neighborhood. I remember the first time I found it. I did not find it when I was, you know, just turned 21
right.
and a thing like that. I was walking through the neighborhood because it's by a park. And you pop out of one entrance of the park, and there it is. You said, "What?"
I remember the only time I've had a beer at Wolski's, and it was in the middle of the afternoon. I wasn't even remotely close to closing it.
But did you get the bumper sticker anyway?
No, you have to earn that. You have to really earn it.
Well, now they also sell T-shirts and stuff. But,
okay.
Keep your eye out whenever you travel around America, or even if you travel around the world, you will see I Close Wolski's, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the craziest of places. You're like, what is this doing at the Grand Canyon? You know,
right.
why is this here at, you know, on Boston and stuff like that? It's a very, very neat little thing. You know, it's again one of those kind of corner bars. We don't have a Cheers in Milwaukee. We have stuff like this.
Yes. That's so true.
And then landmark names. Great name because it is a landmark to go to this one. Again, with that bowling. We used to be the bowling capital of America, Milwaukee. We had the Bowling Hall of Fame here briefly. All this kind of thing. So you can see this is a great picture. They got the Oriental Theaters right by there. So definitely if you were on the east side at any time, you probably had passed that and be like, what is this all about? You get to go down when you go into the bar. So I haven't been here in, again, like a minute. Yeah, probably around 2000.
Absolutely. Sounds about right.
But it's, again, one of those that, oh my gosh, if they were announced that they're going to close, it would really upset a lot of people in Milwaukee. But then they'd be like, okay, well, Joel hasn't been here since 2000, so we can't stay in business. You know, you got to come here. You got to freak at these things and keep the nostalgia going. And see if it was the same thing now that you're older when you were younger.
Mm-hmm.
Martin does get a little bit into the Prohibition. He doesn't dwell on it too long, like we mentioned. He touches on it with each of those previous subjects, but
it's a short chapter, very short.
This is from the back of his from the book here. So he has these pictures. The death of John Barleycorn. Isn't that
Mhm.
terrific? I think that again is a picture from the County Historical Society. They have several of those. There was another funeral that they had for the death of alcohol at the river's edge. Even the top left, he doesn't identify it, but I believe that's with the independent brewery. So it was again another kind of smallish one in Milwaukee. When these other ones were going on. But independent really led the local charge of, we want beer back. Okay, yeah, we'll try to do a soda or this or that kind of a thing. Or I think they did bottled water too. But they're like, we want beer. that's our thing. So, and because they were a smaller one, they probably didn't have to worry as much about, the government cracking down on them of being like, oh, your near beer is too, high in alcohol now.
It, and for the near beer, wasn't it like 3.2% alcohol
No,
they could?
3.2 was what was
Oh,
allowed.
Volstead?
No, that was a short little thing that the federal government passed,
Okay.
FDR and things, before Prohibition got repealed. They allowed 3.2% alcohol to be okay. So a lot of people do, honored that date as the end of Prohibition, when it only was 3.2 beer was allowed again. And, because some of these beers, they were pretty high. They weren't like the 8s or 9s that we have today with Gravity, but they were, it's probably 5 or 6, whatever. It just brewed out naturally too. But 3.2 was this. And Prohibition actually limited the near beer. I think it had to be to 0.05% alcohol, which was basically the same alcohol that you would get in a homemade yeast brewed brut beer. So you would need a lot of near beer to make the into beer. And they had a couple of ways that they made the near beer. The most common was to make it natural beer, heat it to about 135 degrees, where the water would not evaporate yet, but the alcohol has a lower evaporation. So that would evaporate out until they got it right. The problem is you would then be kind of scorching those hops and you get a very bitter kind of a flavor to it. So people really did not like a near beer. It's not like, the ones you can get today, the non-alcoholic beer, the O'Doul's, right? I don't know if you've ever had it.
I've had alcohol-free Heineken.
There you go.
Which is actually just okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Today they have a better process for making it, and it's more of a beer flavored water. Whereas back then they started out, with real beer first, and then they, had to figure out, either how to add more water, more flavors to it so that the alcohol would get less, or let's burn off the alcohol while trying to keep the flavor there. Right. So again, Martin doesn't go into all that detail with that kind of thing in here. These were some of the reasons. There was many reasons. It wasn't just one reason why we had Prohibition. One, of course, is, daddy's maybe going out there and wasting all the money instead of bringing it home, after a Friday night, and he's drinking it all up the beer. This is an interesting one. This is, we had this at the Chut now. It's a war map showing the Kaiser's brew. All the dark places were all the places that they made a lot of the alcohol, and they didn't want to vote dry. Some states had already gone dry before Prohibition even came into effect. But notice, not where the Germans really were. Right. And Nevada, of course. Anything goes in Nevada at that time, even gambling. So, here they're saying, this is during World War I. They're saying, don't support German stuff, which includes drinking beer. Or, then it's un-American. So get rid of that. So many men, like 1 million, 2 million soldiers, went overseas, and they came back. They won the war, and they couldn't even have a beer when they returned to America. It's like, what happened? We lost alcohol? How did that go on? Yeah. Here's a lady that led the Women's Christian Temperance Union, Frances Willard, on the bicycle. And interesting enough, she was a graduate here at Milwaukee. Methodist family. So that's why they had that sobriety for a lifelong thing. But being in Milwaukee, she probably saw a lot of this beer stuff all around. It was probably like, well, I've seen this one guy drunk, and if we can prevent that happening, we should do this. But yeah, kind of interesting. And there you see, they were even somewhat getting in 1908. They claimed that there was nearly 800 dry towns in Wisconsin. So that was still a decade before Prohibition came to pass as a national thing. So it hit it from all these different angles, so it was a noble experiment, as they often say. Okay, let's give it a try, but it didn't work out.
No.
Here is how you could get around some of that. You would make your own. This is hilarious. This is a great image. It's a pocket magazine. It's called Homebrew. And so obviously they would show you things like recipes like this one: make your own beer at home. No boiling, no apparatus.
And it's healthy and nourishing too.
Well, because you're not drinking, river water or untreated sewage water. There's a reason that the socialists in Milwaukee during Prohibition, they said, maybe we should fix our lake water. And that's when they opened the Jones Island water treatment facility during Prohibition. Like, now you have clean drinking water. Milwaukee people, you don't have to drink beer if you don't want to. So, you kind of have to have those alternatives. You can't just be like, oh, let's get rid of this, and you drink nothing,
right.
Or get sick on something. That wouldn't be a good thing. So
no. So they probably had to close those 11 taverns that were on Jones Island.
Yeah, he mentions that here with the cashews.
I couldn't believe that. I was like, oh,
there wasn't many places on Jones Island, right?
Oh my god. Oh.
Well, it was a way to make money,
Yeah.
It was easy. You serve some beer, maybe even made your own that year. So
right.
People were coming for it. They were wanting to buy that. So there we are at the end. Something we did not include was the last chapter, and we can go through some of that. He has several recipes in here.
There's some really nice recipes. If you pick up the book, that's going to be the best way to enjoy these recipes. I think the black and tan French toast sounded the best to me, though, actually.
Will you be trying that at any time?
I'm sorry, what?
Will you be trying that at any time and let us know? That's on page 117.
Yeah, I think, you know what? I think that sounds like a good thing to do this weekend. Yeah, I would like to try it.
Yeah, that is done by the former executive chef of the Cafe Calatrava at the Milwaukee Art Museum. So this was his recipe. I'm sorry for messing up your name, Chef. Thai Cao, maybe? No, K. C-A-O is his last name. Yeah, I mean, you can use beer for flavoring is what they're getting at with the gist. I think we've all probably had beer with brats or, flavor it that way, or the beer battered cod, or, like I had mentioned earlier. But yeah, some of these are really interesting. Here's a Sprecher Black Ninja Burger. It won first place at the Wisconsin State Fair in 2010.
All right.
In a grilling with beer contest. And again, doesn't that just sound like Wisconsin? Yeah, we're going to have that.
It's so true. This was a really fun book to read. We didn't get to talk about everything in it because there was so much in it. There were so many landmarks in this. It was so landmark heavy. We obviously did a highlights tour. But I thought this was a great book. I'm really glad we covered it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spoil it for anybody else that might be like, hey, maybe they got my favorite in there.
Absolutely.
It's a simple pickup. It introduces you to, like you said, Martin Hintz, who's written some wonderful things. I've read several of his Irish items on Milwaukee. Great things. So that's interesting type of stuff. I can't remember. We had him at the Chudham Museum, and he talked on something, but I can't remember. He was one of our first ones that we had there. Maybe it was on beer, maybe it was on sports. So many history type of things. So, and he writes. It's so easy to read, right? I mean, he doesn't get encyclopedia into all the little details. He hits on them though, so you're not like, oh, why didn't he mention that? I mean, he's going to mention, all the names, all the important things. He hits, the major stuff. And then it's like, okay, well, if you want to get into it more, check out his resources, hit up some other favorite books, do things like that. So yeah, very, very good one. We'll probably have to do another beer one, right?
I think so. There's so much brewing history. There's so much beer history in Milwaukee. I mean, this was a really fun book to read. Again, we're going to be having a beer tasting event at Sugar Maple on Thursday, September 22nd. If you were paying attention, you're going to see and hear some of the trivia that we'll do during that event to win some prizes. So thank you so much,
Well, I'm
Joel,
just going to
for...
check our comments here to see if anybody had a
Oh,
question.
yeah, absolutely.
Somebody asked, will this book be for sale at your September event?
I can certainly figure out a way to get some there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we could get it with a local bookstore, and we could do that.
No problem.
Yeah, that was Cindy. Cindy also said, yeah, we need to fit, visit these places and maybe close Walski's. It's too much past my bedtime now to do it.
Mine too.
So yeah, Cindy also says that her grandparents had a tavern, and she remembers those beers. Yeah, a lot of families probably did have a tavern at some time in their history. Images like that, if it was in Bayview, we would love those at the Bayview Historical Society. Give us those to copy or something like that, and we can share those and do fun things with that. So
and there were so many tied houses. There were so many Pabst and Schlitz tied houses and corner bars. So many times you're walking down the street and you can look at a house and go, that was a tavern.
Yeah, tied house. I mentioned it once too. Those were directly owned by the breweries, and it wasn't allowed after Prohibition. So imagine in Milwaukee where you had all these breweries competing, you would have a Schlitz bar in one corner. Across the street would be a Blatz. Kitty corner would be a Pabst. And then you need to have maybe a Gettleman somewhere in there.
Right.
And some of our historians in Milwaukee have really researched and looked up and tried to find, these are all the Cream City tied house buildings that still stand. These are all the Gettlemans. These are, the Schlitz or those type of things. So again, some interesting history, some interesting books. This is just a wonderful one to kind of introduce you and give you a little flavor. And if you really like this kind of stuff, you can dig in, and you'll never learn it all. You just won't. There's so much. And that's just about our little town of Milwaukee. Yeah.
I love it.
All right.
All
well,
right.
Thank you for joining us. Ask any other questions later on in Facebook. Hannah and I'm sure some other experts will check it out, and we'll try to answer your questions.
Thank you so much.